It was a sweltering summer evening when I pulled up to the Islamic Center of Waco for my first Ramadan iftar. The local Muslim faith community had opened its doors to the public to join them as they broke their month-long fast. After respectfully removing my shoes before entering their worship space, I found a place to sit. And by sit, I mean a patch of carpet upon which to sit. Chairs are limited for the elderly and disabled who can't manage to sit on the floor. Soon the place was packed with all sorts of people: Christians, Jews, Muslims, and people of no faith at all, some curious, everyone reverent, all sitting side by side, elbow to elbow. Eventually, all the Muslim men lined up with their backs to the crowd. A cantor led them in prayer as they repeatedly bowed and kneeled, sometimes touching their head to the floor and then rising in unison. I couldn't understand a word of the cantor, but it sounded holy and beautiful and as ancient as their faith. Soon everyone was invited to eat. In an adjoining room, tables that stretched the length of our sanctuary were filled with delicious, spicy dishes that I knew would have me popping in acid later on in the middle of the night. But it was worth it. I loaded my plate up and returned to the worship space where plastic runners had been laid out on the floor for everyone to eat on. I sat next to a stranger, and we enjoyed each other's company as we exclaimed over the food and the events of the evening. And it was a sacred and holy experience. Let me share another experience. Shortly after I arrived in Waco, I heard about the Gospel Cafe. It's a ministry of Cross Ties Ecumenical Church, a house church located across the street from the Kate Ross housing projects. 3 days a week, it offers delicious home-cooked meals free of charge to anyone who joins them. I began volunteering there, picking up plates after folks had eaten, scraping the leftovers into the trash, and bringing a dessert of choice to the diners. Besides feeding the hungry, the ministry's purpose is for strangers who find themselves sitting together at a table to get to know each other. Sometimes a good-natured man named Virgil would wander through the noisy crowd, offering to pray for them. Virgil looked like a black biblical prophet with his wooden staff and dressed in a brightly colored caftan and matching head wrap. A person eating a tater tot casserole would pause long enough for Virgil to kneel beside them, take their hand, and lift up a prayer on their behalf. Then the person would resume eating, and Virgil would wander off among the tables, greeting everyone along the way. And it was a sacred and holy experience to witness. This coming Thursday, I'll be joining others at the quarterly Community Race Relations Coalition meeting. The race-related topics vary, with sometimes a panel discussion and sometimes a movie to inspire the conversation afterward. But one thing you can always count on is the meal that is offered at the beginning of the evening. In fact, you can just about count on the menu: chicken tenders, green beans, and potato salad. Walking into a room of strangers can be a bit intimidating. And so the natural tendency is to find someone you know and sit with them. But even though we are always encouraged to sit with someone we don't know and who doesn't look like us, white people and people of color usually end up sitting at separate tables. At the last meeting, I decided to step out of my comfort zone and sit with some folks I didn't know. I asked 2 black women if I could join them, and they said of course I could. They had been having a conversation about how much they wished Waco had a good vegetarian restaurant. I agreed with them, and we talked a bit about vegan cooking. One was an Orthodox Christian. The other got her church from television on Sunday mornings. And when asked about my faith, I explained I was a minister at a church that welcomed and affirmed the LGBTQIA+ community, and no one batted an eye. And it was a sacred and holy experience. There's something that happens around a meal that is shared with another person that's almost mystical. Barriers come down, and people tend to be more genuine with each other than they otherwise would be. We reveal our true, authentic selves to each other, authentic selves that have been made in the image of God. That's what happened in this morning's text when Jesus revealed his true, authentic self at the dinner table of 2 of his disciples. On the day of his resurrection, Jesus drew up alongside the 2 disciples who were traveling the 7-mile distance from Jerusalem back to their home in Emmaus. But they didn't recognize him. As far as they could tell, he was just another stranger. They shared with him the news of what had taken place in Jerusalem, how Jesus had been crucified, and how disappointed they were that he wasn't the Messiah that they had been longing and hoping for. And then they sort of had an impromptu Bible study along the way, led by Jesus. But still, they didn't recognize him. It wasn't until after they had arrived at their home and urged him to join them for a meal that things clicked into place for them. Jesus seemed to take over as the host, taking the bread, blessing and breaking it, and giving it to them. And that's when their eyes were opened and they saw him for who he really was. Meals had always figured prominently into Jesus' ministry. As they saw him blessing and breaking the bread, maybe they remembered the last time they had seen him do that, just days earlier when he was gathered with them in an upper room on the night of his crucifixion. Or maybe they remembered him breaking just a few small loaves of bread and feeding thousands of people with it. Or maybe they recalled the many meals he had shared with both friends and opponents. Or maybe it was all of the above. Regardless, when he blessed and broke the bread at this particular meal, the simple act was transformed into a sacred and holy experience. An experience so sacred that they couldn't wait to share it with their colleagues. And so off they went, heading back to Jerusalem in the night to share their news. I don't understand it, but there's something about sharing a meal with someone that offers up the potential of a sacred and holy experience. I say potential because it doesn't always happen. Sometimes the food is so good that it becomes the entire focus of our time together. Or sometimes our cell phones do. Look around in a restaurant and you'll see what I mean when you notice how many tables are silent because everyone is staring at their phones. But wherever there is food, there is the potential for it being a sacred experience. Whether it's the occasional meal with a friend at IHOP, or the monthly potluck social after church, or the quiet dinner with a loved one, shared meals offer us the opportunity to take off the mask that we've been wearing, a disguise designed to make us look like we've got it all together when actually our world may be falling apart. And meals give us a chance to offer a silent prayer of thanks for the time spent with someone who cares about us. And in the sharing of that meal with another, we both take a breather from the hectic world in which we live. And we draw from the other the courage and strength to return to our individual rat races, knowing it's going to be okay. Everything will be all right. So next time you share a meal with someone, don't take it for granted. Put away your phone long enough that you recognize the moment for what it is, a sacred and holy experience. One that is as sacred and holy as the meal Jesus shared with this morning's 2 disciples. One that prefigures the meal we will all share together in the afterlife. A meal in which everyone has a place at the table. Amen.